Well, I'm joined once again by Pete Baker from Life Church Lancashire. Great to have him joining me on today's Breakfast Bite. Hello, Pete.
Morning. Morning. Good to see you and good to be with everyone this morning.
Yes, great to see you again. And looking forward to what you've got to bring us today. Another hero, I presume.
Yes, yeah, we'll think about another hero of the faith, and we'll think about John, one of the 12 disciples. I don't think we've talked about John already. We've talked about a few of the disciples, but John is probably a character that I resonate with the most, maybe of the disciples. He writes one of the Gospels, the Book of John, and the Book of John starts with these incredible words, where John is a friend of Jesus, but when John's describing Jesus in his Gospel, he calls him the Word, the Logos, the one who makes sense of life, the Logos, the logic. And John is claiming that Jesus isn't only the Son of God, but the creator of the universe. That's what John claims at the beginning of his Gospel. If anyone ever says that the Bible never teaches that Jesus was God, well, read John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then later, John goes on to say, and the Word became flesh and dwelt amongst us. That's John's Christmas story. Matthew and Luke have the Christmas stories. We know it, but John's kind of Christmas scripture is John 1:14. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling amongst us. Or as the Message version says, the Word became flesh and moved into the neighborhood. I love that version. So this is John the beloved, John who writes one of the Gospels, then goes on to write the book of Revelation as well, and has the three letters attributed to him as well. John, one of the followers, we think the youngest of the disciples, but the image I want us to think about this morning to do with John is at the Last Supper, which is recorded in all four Gospels, and in John's Gospel of the Last Supper, we have this really powerful scene where I don't know what people imagine when they imagine the Last Supper. And lots of people were obsessed a few weeks ago during the opening ceremony of the Olympics about the Last Supper, Da Vinci's Last Supper scene. And so I don't know what people imagine when they imagine the Last Supper. But this was a Jewish meal. This is Passover meal. This is a meal amongst friends. And they were reclining at the table, as in they were lying down to eat this meal. And this is a meal that the Jewish people eat every year, the Passover festival, to remember the people of God being set free from slavery in Egypt, and the spirit of death passing over as they entered into new life. And Christians celebrate this meal every week as they share communion, as they take the Eucharist, the Lord's Supper, whatever you call it in your tradition. And so this is the first Last Supper, the first communion, the Last Supper, the Passover meal, the Seder meal. And it says that they're all reclining at the table, and John is reclining and laying on the chest of Jesus, so close that he can hear his heartbeat. Now, I've added that bit. The scripture says that John is reclining on the chest of Jesus. But I love that image. And in Celtic Christianity, it's a really important image of, John is so close to Jesus that he can hear the heartbeat. John could literally hear the heartbeat of Jesus because he was reclining on him. He was leaning on him. He could hear the heart of Jesus. And I love that image. And for us this morning, whatever you're doing, eating your breakfast, preparing for your day, answering some emails, listening to the radio, wherever it might be, whatever you're doing this morning, could you be like John and recline and lean into the Spirit of God, lean into the presence of God, lean into the Father heart of God, so close that you could hear his heartbeat. And what does the heart of God beat for? What does the heart of God beat for? It beats for people, beats for justice. So this morning, if we could recline, if we could lean into the heart of Jesus, if we could lean into the heart of God, what would we hear? God's heart beats. And what does his heart beat for? John was so close to the heart of Jesus that he could hear his literal heartbeat. But if we could hear the heart of God this morning, what would we hear? So it's maybe just a little thought for us this morning. As we think about John, one of the heroes of the faith, John the beloved, John, I love that in John's Gospel. John refers to himself as the disciple that Jesus loved. And that can look like favorite, that he thinks he's Jesus' favorite. But what he's actually saying is that his identity means nothing other than being loved by God. And that's how John wanted to be identified, as someone loved by God. And I love that. I love that idea that however you see yourself, whatever word you would want to ascribe to your own name. John says, here's my identity. I am loved by God. I'm loved by Jesus. That's John's identity. So yeah, lots of different thoughts there connected to the disciple John. Do with that what you may this morning.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Pete. Actually, I never really knew about that, how John was actually reclining on Jesus' chest. I'd never actually picked up that or heard that in scripture. I think I'm very familiar with the Last Supper, that account, but I'd never actually known that.
Yeah, so it's in John's Gospel. John, I've not actually brought it up. I'll just quickly try and find it. It's John. I think it's John 13. John's Gospel is a very different gospel out of the four Gospels. The other four kind of follow a very similar kind of pattern. But in John's Gospel, we get to the Last Supper very, very quickly. Oh yeah, I found it very quickly. It's John 13, verse 23. One of them, the disciple whom Jesus loved, was reclining next to him. So it's kind of this image of they're all sat around the table, but we get this image of John is close to Jesus, is reclining, is leaning into Jesus, at the Last Supper. And so obviously there's some poetry there of this idea of so close you can hear his heartbeat. But I kind of love that idea that John was so close to the literal human Jesus that he could hear his heartbeat. He was reclining, leaning into Jesus. And as I said, in Celtic Christian tradition, they kind of look to John as one of their as like a spiritual father for Celtic Christianity, and that's part of the tradition there that people could look into. But yeah, John 13 is the scripture.
Awesome. I'll remember that one.
Cool.
Thank you so much, Pete. Great. Another breakfast bite. Another great hero of the faith.
Yeah. Have a great day.
You too.
Here at Pure 24/7 Radio, we have had the privilege of speaking to some amazing people with amazing stories.
So I was already doing the work of an evangelist, and then I discovered that there was a term for it. And then I realized, I really wanted to learn more about the Bible and Christianity. So I went to theological college.
Most people think that my life as a marine biologist was spent riding on the back of a dolphin into the sunset.
That's my view.
Yeah, I did that never.
Been on the road 35 years, man and boy, doing magic and comedy to communicate the gospel. When I started off in 88, I was doing escapology. I kind of took that on from a friend of mine called Pete Gilbert, who was a real pioneer in creative communication.
If you have missed any of these interviews or would like to hear them again, you can. Simply head over to our catch-up section at www.pure247radio.org. That's www.pure247radio.org.